The scene opens with our main character, Kang Min-ho, dragging his shackled feet as bloodlust overflows from his eyes. He walks towards his latest victim, Gong Sun-ji, who screams at the top of her lungs as he makes his way to her and devours her. We're now taken back to when it all started. One day, some men drive out to a dump yard and dump some toxic waste there. The waste is so toxic that it immediately kills plants upon contact and seeps into the soil. The next day, some crows rummage through the same dump site, and one of them almost picks out the eyes of a corpse lying there. However, the corpse immediately grips the poor bird and sits up amidst the rubbish. This is our protagonist, Min-ho, who stands to his feet and lights a cigarette with trembling hands, only to discover that the smoke is leaking from his body. He wonders what is happening, but soon realizes that he got shot. Out of shock, Min-ho's cigarette slips from his hand and burns his feet, but he feels no pain. He even steals a glance at himself in a mirror and is shocked to find that he looks like a corpse. He is so stunned that he falls on his butt, and it eventually dawns on him that he is a zombie now. He soon finds out that he also can't speak, and all his efforts to do so only result in weird grunting noises. Soon after that, Min-ho makes his way to the nearest town, wondering why he can't remember anything. On the other hand, we see a reporter named Gong Sun-ji, who is using her producer as a stepping stool to record a man suspected to be the notorious criminal called Santa Killer. She tries to take a phone call but loses her phone in his compound. The man calmly steps out, answers the call, and discovers that Sun-ji is a reporter. She tries to lie her way out of the situation, but he notices the camera in her hand and grows suspicious. She swipes her phone after this and makes a run for it, pulling the producer with her. Unfortunately, this man sets his dog on them, and it chases them until they reach their car. Luckily, Detective Cha Do-hyun and his partner, Officer Bae-ee, rush down to the scene and meet Sun-ji, hiding under a bucket as the dog hounds her. The detective easily calls off the dog, and the producer comes out from hiding too. The cops later clarify that the man they were recording isn't the suspected Santa Killer, but is a registered child molester instead. On hearing this, Sun-ji then kicks him between the legs for good measure. On the other hand, the starving Min-ho staggers through the forest. He sees a rabbit but is too slow to catch it. He passes out soon enough, and by the time he regains consciousness, he realizes that he ate the rabbit raw. He becomes tired of the pathetic life he's living and jumps off a cliff. Unfortunately, he survives and wakes up on the rock, which forces him to finally accept that he's a zombie. Back at the police station, Sun-ji assaults the molester some more and gets carried out of the place. She then exits the station before remembering that the molester's dog got her phone. As for Min-ho, he staggers his way into the molester's compound, and the dog barks at him. He drives it away and switches his bloody shirt for Sun-ji's hoodie. At that moment, Sun-ji is also searching the compound for her phone. She catches Min-ho lurking about, and he's not fast enough to flee the scene. He tries to avoid her, but she just slips her hand into the pocket of the hoodie and retrieves her phone. While she does this, the zombie Min-ho almost takes a bite of her head. Afterwards, she hands him some money and begs him to keep his alcoholism in check, because she thinks that is the reason for his strange behavior. The next day, Min-ho tries hunting a bird down from the nest using a stone but can't. He passes out due to starvation, and when he wakes up, he discovers that he has once again consumed an animal. Later, Sun-ji laments to her friend Bora about losing some money and even her sister's clothes. She even mentions seeing Min-ho. Her elder sister, Sun-young, barges inside after hearing that her sister still owes the settlement amount from the month before. She rages on and on about how little Sun-ji gets paid for her job and apologizes to Bora for the ruckus. The next day, a gluttonous detective named Lee Sung-rak gulps down his spicy food while delaying the delivery man. He ends up offering him a job, which the delivery man immediately turns down. The delivery man then gets on the phone with his abusive boss, only for Sung-rak to swipe the phone and quit on his behalf. He then repeats the offer and adds that he'll even make the man the city's branch manager. On the other hand, Min-ho watches a movie where the humans beat up a bus full of zombies. He could finally relate to how the zombies felt, and this pushed him to want to avoid dying at human hands. He begins to try everything he can to look like a human. He tries to walk like a human, talk like a human, and even eat like one. He falls off the treadmill a couple of times but doesn't stop. After a year of continuous training, he becomes able to run, speak fluently, and successfully throw a rock. Meanwhile, Sun-ji keeps going over the Santa Killer case, to the extent that she doesn't get any sleep because of it. Her sister enters her room the next morning and can't stop thinking of how much time Sun-ji gives to the case. Later on, Sun-ji links up with her producer, and he tries to tell her not to blame herself for the casualties in the Santa case, but she doesn't listen. Back in Min-ho, he's lounging in a cave when he smells some meat. He steps out and sees a man paying tribute to his dad's grave. The man thinks he is a wild animal, so he throws him a pork foreleg. Soon enough, he witnesses this man get brutally murdered and dragged away. The body gets flung down a cliff, and Min-ho later discovers that the man still has life. He screams from the shock before bending over to hear what the man has to say. Unfortunately, he only mumbles and hands the zombie a bunch of keys. Minho buries him and then goes through his bag, where he sees a business card belonging to Kim Moo-young, a private detective. Minho steals the clothes off of Moo-young's body and makes his way to his address. Meanwhile, Lee Tae-kyun, husband to Sun Young and a zombie movie enthusiast, goes over the news of another headless animal left out in the forest. He's certain that it wasn't done by a wolf or a wild boar. Back to Minho. He takes a quick look into the fridge to grab all he can eat, only for him to throw up mere moments later. The next day, Sunji walks in on Detective Do-hyun and her nephew Jun-woo playing soccer. The detective then takes a break to talk with her a little. He claims that he just wanted to check in, but Sunji doesn't stop fishing for the case he's working on. Their faces come so close that it makes Do-hyun uncomfortable, so they all go back to playing soccer. Meanwhile, Minho uses Moo-young's computer to search for himself, but still comes up empty-handed. Days go by and he grows very hungry. He notices some pigeons outside his window and wastes no time trying to capture them. Meanwhile, Sung-rak and his new aide Wang Wei peep on him from their window. They lock eyes, and Minho immediately retreats. Sung-rak then declares that he'll make Moo-young regret coming back to Gangnam. Meanwhile, the zombie Minho realizes that he needs money to get food, so he goes job hunting online. That night, Sunji walks in on Tae-kyun, still going over the headless animals found in Choeol Mountain. She mocks him for being obsessed with the case, and her sister ends up torturing both of them. On the other side, Minho chose to fold pizza boxes remotely, and after folding about 200 of them, he gets exhausted. Just then, Moo-young's company phone buzzes with a message from a client. He ignores it until the client asks how much he charges. He replies with his rate, and the client immediately agrees, attaching a picture of his missing dog, Ho-do. Minho wonders how he'll do any detective work looking like a zombie, and suddenly comes across an ad for a super covering BB cream. The next day, he swipes his covering cream from the door and applies it all over his body until he empties the tube. He steps out looking like $1,000,000, only to meet up with a bunch of 5-year-olds, including Jun-woo. The kids repeatedly ask if he's the detective they hired, but he just asks for his deposit instead. They boldly hand him 50 cents, and Jun-woo tells him that he told them that he charges 5,000. He asks all 3 kids to empty their pockets, so they change their minds and ask for the 50 cents back. Minho refuses to return it, so the kids mob him. Meanwhile, Sunji and her producer turn the corner as they talk about how much they hate people who hurt kids. She then notices Jun-woo and the others and rushes to the scene. They immediately report Minho for being a cheapskate, so Sunji challenges him. She concludes that he must be a molester and asks him to prove that he doesn't have an ankle monitor. Immediately, she grabs his wrist, but he wiggles free and makes a run for it. She chases after him, and the kids follow suit. Soon enough, more kids join in the chase. They run and keep running until they all get tired. Minho continues running until Sunji borrows a helmet and throws it like a shot put. The helmet goes straight to Minho's head and knocks him down, leaving him wondering if this is how his life will end. The zombie passes out on the spot, and everyone hurdles around his body. Sunji tries to wake him and realizes that his body is cold. She listens for a heartbeat and doesn't hear anything. This is when she begins to panic. She then gets the producer to call an ambulance. She continues to panic inside the ambulance and prays as the medics try to revive him. They give up soon enough, and while everyone is worried, Minho regains consciousness. Sunji then pushes him back to the bed, hitting his head once again. The zombie passes out as a result of this and finds himself in Gangnam Hospital when he wakes up. The sound of the police sirens alerts him immediately, and Sunji notices that he's awake. She rushes down and bows her head in apology, but Minho still guards himself when she reaches for her bag. She then presents him with her business card, explaining that she's a current affairs writer. He begins to cough, so Sunji leaves to get a doctor. Before she comes back, Minho escapes. She then calls Detective Do-hyun, who explains that the man she hurt could press charges for aggravated assault. Meanwhile, no one at the precinct is surprised to hear that Sunji got into trouble again, and it gets worse when her big sister shows up. At the same time, Sung-rak and his assistant share flyers on the street, inviting passers-by to patronize the World King Agency. Soon enough, Minho tries getting into his temporary office, only for Sung-rak to stop him. Fortunately, he doesn't know Kim Moo-young well, so he mistakes Minho for him. The zombie realizes this and leaves Sung-rak's hand hanging. He barely has time to relax before a strange lady intrudes on his privacy, announcing that she sells cosmetics. She recommends a product worth $540, and of course, Minho can't afford it, so he tells her to leave. She recommends another, and when he turns her down, she angrily leaves his office, forgetting a sample of sunscreen. Minho then realizes that he's still hungry, so he puts on his hat and leaves the office too. Meanwhile, evangelists of the Great Truth Organization preach the gospel of repentance and also talk down on Sunji's program, In Depth, 70 Minutes. Sunji happens to walk by their stand, so they crowd her and begin to yell at her for spoiling the name of their leader, Lee Kwang-shik. In turn, Sunji lists out all the crimes their leader has committed. Luckily, her producer intervenes and drags her out of their midst. He then asks if she has contacted her witness for the next show, and Sunji admits that she has nothing. Afterwards, Sunji pays Hyung Cheol a visit. Apparently, he's her witness, and she's been disturbing him for a while. He finally gives her some attention and scolds her for not thinking about how the Santa case has affected others. Meanwhile, Min-ho roams around and almost bites the neck of a stranger. Luckily, the stranger turns in time to stop him, and Min-ho continues to walk aimlessly. Soon enough, he runs into Jun-woo's dog in an alley and returns only the tag to the boy, asking him to bring more money if he wants the dog. Later, Sun-young notices the fridge is empty. Her sister had taken all of the groceries to Hyung Cheol's construction site and cooked for all the workers, just to get his testimony. It doesn't work, so she tries helping him unload his groceries later on. But that too doesn't work. She's left boiling in her anger as she promises to catch the Santa killer by any means. Sunji even tracks her witness to his home and begs him to come onto her show. She then explains how his testimony could give other witnesses the courage to speak up too. As for Min-ho, he feeds the dog named Hodu and stares at it with a smile as he thinks it'll fetch him so much money. He's about to eat the poor dog when he overhears an announcement for a sampling of free food. Min-ho wonders how he'll go outside and remembers he has sunblock. He immediately picks it up and applies it while the new restaurant staff sings their jingles right outside. Weirdly, Bora turns out to be the owner of this new restaurant. Min-ho comes out soon enough, face white as snow, and realizes that Sung-rak and Wei are also aiming for the free food. Unfortunately, there's only one piece left. Both teams hurry to reach the piece, only for Bora to eat it in front of them. Sung-rak leaves, but Min-ho stays back and tries to enter the pot. Soon enough, he sees two other boys looking like zombies. Bora steps outside and asks why Min-ho's makeup isn't completely done. He's uninterested, so he tells her to find another zombie. He walks away after this, but stops in his tracks when he hears her promise to pack some stew to the other two boys dressed as zombies. On the other hand, Hyung Cheol finally agrees to do the interview, so Sunji and her producer set things up. Hyung Cheol explains how he saw the culprit when he went fishing one fateful night 12 months ago. Meanwhile, Sung-rak treats Wei to some beef soup at Bora's new restaurant, but when Wei discovers that they're splitting the bill, he leaves immediately. Sung-rak wastes no time leaving too, making Bora all the more pissed. Anyway, Sunji and Do-hyun discuss how she's going to catch the Santa killer. They then step into Bora's restaurant, congratulating her on her opening. They take a seat and banter for a while before Sunji leaves to make a call. She's worried about not hearing from Hyung Cheol and notices the zombies dancing outside the restaurant. At that moment, Min-ho spies on them and gets challenged to dance. He pushes the other dancers aside and does moves that drives the crowd crazy. All the other dancers are tired, but Min-ho just keeps dancing. Inside, Bora talks about how con artists and pretenders fake injuries just so they can cash out. Sunji refuses to believe that that was what Min-ho was doing. Soon enough, the dancers step in for their pay, but they scare the life out of Do-hyun. Bora, on the other hand, just gets up, greets them, and gives each of them their stew. She asks about Min-ho, only for her to hear complaints from the kitchen area. Apparently, the chef couldn't bear to witness Min-ho chow down raw pig intestines. Do-hyun rushes to the scene, but Min-ho tackles and almost strangles him with some intestines. He then swiftly leaves the restaurant. Do-hyun tries to chase after him, but it's pointless, seeing as he's limping. The head dancer, Han Gyul, then reports to them that he has no idea who Min-ho is, as he was not part of their group. Anyway, Min-ho rushes into the forest as his zombie instinct increases and passes out almost immediately. He wakes up the next morning and sees that he devoured a deer. Back to Sunji, she gets scolded by her big sister for almost killing a man with a helmet. Things get worse as she brings up the food that she stole from the fridge and the fact that she hasn't paid rent in ages. Junwoo later brings out Sunji's slippers, telling her that his mom says she can't come in until her rent is paid. He then explains how cool the other kids think she is. She asks if he knows Min-ho, and Junwoo reveals that he's a private detective. On the other side, Min-ho replays his fight with Do-hyun in his head and plans to step out soon. He squeezes what's left of the BB cream and dresses up to leave. Unfortunately, Sunji comes knocking at his door right at that moment. He tries to escape, but every route is filled with people, so he reluctantly opens the door for Sunji. She immediately mentions not hearing a heartbeat and asks if he has a medical condition. After screaming that he won't get tested, Sunji proposes that they put something in writing to make sure that they are both over the rough previous encounter. Min-ho isn't interested, but Sunji still dumps the agreement on his desk and runs away. Min-ho then meets Junwoo in the alley and demonstrates his fighting style for the kinds. In turn, Junwoo takes him to the dojo, where he repeats his fighting fighting style in front of kids and an instructor. All his efforts prove futile, so he just excuses himself. On the way, he sees a poster for BB cream, and it just reminds him that he can't afford it. That night, on In Depth for 70 minutes, the Santa Claus killer gets discussed. From how he killed a young girl named Sori to how the snow had covered his tracks. The girl's body was found in the fishing reservoir, and her dad was featured on the show previously. They then air Hyung Cheol's testimony alongside a sketch of what the killer looks like. Afterwards, they air a picture of young Sori, and it ignites a fire in Min-ho, making him bang the glass. Later, Sunji sneaks into the house and still ends up waking her sister. She commends Sunji for her work on the Santa case, and they bid each other goodnight. She then texts Hyung Cheol, thanking him for his help. Unfortunately, the next day she gets bad news about him getting attacked. She and the producer head to the hospital, where they meet Do-hyun, who is already questioning him. She continually apologizes, even when Hyung Cheol's wife Kyung-mi grabs her by her coat. Meanwhile, Moo Young's landlady comes knocking and tells Min-ho that he has until the end of the week to pay his rent. Min-ho has no money, but he has an idea. He then rummages through the trash until he finds Sunji's agreement. That night, Sunji goes drinking to drown her sorrows and laments to the owner of the tent. She's so miserable that she bangs her head against the table continuously. She even gets a call from her boss, but the sadness doesn't stop. To worsen things, her phone falls into her noodles and she just continues eating. She staggers home and Min-ho tails her. He witnesses as some folks in a van abduct her and chases after them. Min-ho waits for them in a tunnel and stands in front of their car. Of course, they hit him, but they're more shocked when he gets up and runs towards them. By this time, Sunji is already puking on the sidewalk. Min-ho struggles with the car until the culprits drive off, and Sunji recognizes him as the helmet guy. She approaches him, drunk as a man on his bachelor's eve, and all Min-ho does is try to extort money from her. Unfortunately, she just rests on his chest and falls asleep. Min-ho takes a shower and stares at the gunshot hole in his stomach. Meanwhile, Sunji wakes up, looking scary enough to shock Tae-kyun. He gets her breakfast and mentions calling her multiple times. To confirm this, she pulls out her phone alongside the agreement Min-ho left with her. She soon realizes that he wants $100,000, so she immediately grabs her things and goes after him. Meanwhile, Min-ho freshens up and then heads to the door, only to be ambushed by a disheveled Sunji. She takes a seat and begins to debate the outrageous sum he's asking for. She switches to pity, but as she states out her numerous problems, all Min-ho notices is how much she smells like poop. He just accepts that Sunji is too broke to afford anything, so he crushes the agreement and tells her to forget everything. He then kicks her out of his office and admits that he has no choice but to become a detective. Across the street, Wei mentions how Min-ho helped find a dog for only 50 cents. This makes Sungrock think he's stupid. Anyway, the zombie goes around town sharing flyers but makes no progress at all. Do-hyun tracks down Sunji later on and hands her some hangover soup. They then talk about Hyung Cheol and how he's still in danger. Little Junwoo then suggests using Min-ho to find him, and it sounds like a good idea. Meanwhile, Tae-kyun meets with the producer about his zombie script. He thrashes the scripts and ends up saying that only a blind investor would put money into it. A determined Tae-kyun then offers to find the investor himself. Later on, Junwoo and his friends pay $5 to play with Hodu for an hour. Min-ho leaves them on the roof to answer the door and finds Sunji there. She forces her way into the office and refuses to leave, despite the numerous times Min-ho tells her to. Just then, a client named Kang Go-yoon comes knocking and offers him a job to find her daughter, Yoon-ju. Sunji pretends to be Min-ho's assistant and asks the client a few questions. Go-yoon then flashes a briefcase full of money, telling the zombie to call when the job is done. Afterwards, Sunji tries to show how useful she can be and explains that she has handled 62 missing person cases. Min-ho remains stubborn until she's almost at the door and then gives her one shot to prove herself. Next, they head to Go-yoon's home and interview the maid. They discover that Yoon-ju never really got along with her mother and spent most of her time in her room. They visit the room, and Sunji goes through her computer until she comes across the Gangnam Fast Center, a semi-religious organization. Upon arrival, Min-ho refuses to enter and tells Sunji that he has a social phobia. She doesn't believe it, but he pressures her to go in alone. She catches the staff drinking, and while one of them is away, she quickly checks their books for Yoon-ju's name. When the receptionist returns, she kicks out Sunji for wanting information on their members. She tells Min-ho everything and assures him that their target is inside. Since she got kicked out, Min-ho is the only option. He hates every moment of it, but heads home to pack a bag. He stares at his last meat reserve and packs it along with him. Sunji sees him off and tells him to be strong for the next 3 days. Upon arrival, they're seated in a group, and everyone's belongings get confiscated. Min-ho struggles to hold onto his bag, but his meat gets discovered. To worsen things, the manager pats him down and retrieves the meat in his sleeves and trousers. Afterwards, They go for a photo shoot, and Minho hates every minute of it. Up next is lunch, and it's all vegetables. Minho just stares at it until another member of the center comes along. He smells a familiar perfume on him and asks if he knows Yoonju. This man denies it and heads over to his girlfriend's table. Meanwhile, Sunji links up with Miss Kang and goes through Yoonju's bank book. At the fast center, Minho keeps searching for his target but can't find her. Everyone then rallies for some yoga, and he strikes a pose so unique that it draws the manager's attention. At the Lee residence, Sun Young voices her hatred for her husband's film career, but Taekyun refuses to give it up. Meanwhile, Sunji infiltrates a warehouse on a hunch, and while poking around, she sees one of the evangelists from earlier. She tries to reach Minho, but his phone is locked away. On the other hand, Minho can't get any sleep because of his hunger. He finds his way to the kitchen, but meets a lady munching on an onion. He bursts open the fridge and gets her a donut, but her boyfriend comes soon enough, escorted by the manager. She's whisked away while Minho is in hiding, and afterwards, the manager and the boyfriend discuss how he brings girls to the center for 30% of the profit. To avoid getting caught, Minho escapes outside and joins a group of people being led by the manager. They're taken through a tunnel until they join a congregation led by Lee Kwang-shik, a notorious cult leader. As Kwang-shik performs miracles, Minho makes a run for it. On the flip side, Sunji and Detective Do-hyun race down to the fast center. Upon arrival, Sunji bangs on the door, and the receptionist refuses her entrance. She still doesn't let them in when the detective flashes his badge. Meanwhile, Minho gets chased until he hides in a closet. The manager does everything possible to get him out, including pummeling the closet with a crowbar. His transformation starts, so he bursts out with a cloth over his head. Kwang-shik tells them to let him go, and Minho runs and bursts through a window. He quickly revives himself and runs past Sunji without her knowledge. Flashes of his memories later come to him, and he realizes that he was murdered. That night, Sunji tracks him down to the office, pleading Yoonju's case. He still sends her away, though. She returns the next morning, but Minho plugs his ears so he can't hear her. She switches to a megaphone, and when it doesn't work, she uses a rope to come to his window. He just shuts the blinds. Sunji then makes some tea outside the door and fans the scent into the office. In turn, Minho pegs his nose. Come nightfall, Sunji is still by the door, explaining how the great truth is a cult that ruins lives. She then asks if he doesn't care about Yoonju's family. Tired, she packs her things to leave, only for Minho to come out with his hoodie and give her conditions for his cooperation. Sunji promptly fetches him his BB cream and some chicken, and minutes later, he opens the door for her. They discuss how Lee Kwang-shik was behind it all and how Yoonju was deep in prayer. He then gives Sunji the supplement that was handed out at the fast center. The next day, Sunji ropes Bora into using her nursing past, and together they blackmail a doctor into getting the analysis report of the supplement. Later on, Minho and Sunji stake out the fast center, and it becomes clear that they have to get back in to make any real progress. Minho initially refuses, but Sunji reminds him of how much food he'll get after successfully completing the mission. They return to the office, where Sunji reveals Moo Young's secret closet, which contains everything a private eye needs. She dresses him in a green onesie and gets him on a vegetable delivery crew to the fast center. He successfully infiltrates the cafeteria, and Sunji gets back to him with Yoonju's location. After getting it wrong the first time, he finds her praying and tells her to come with him. Yoonju begins to scream, so he knocks her out and rolls her to the exit in a barrel. The manager stops him and asks him to remove his mask. Luckily, his mustache disguise saves him. He runs into the boyfriend up front, and they fight over what's in the barrel. Minho successfully knocks him out too, but Yoonju regains consciousness and hits him on the head. While Minho's out cold, Yoonju realizes that her boyfriend is two-timing her, so she and the new girl fight it out. Minho regains consciousness just as the manager approaches and switches to Plan B. The manager notices the mustache on the floor and realizes who he had seen earlier. Meanwhile, Sungrock and Wei try giving Junwoo and his friends some flyers, but they're Minho's fans. They then approach Minho's office to warn him off, but he's not around. That night, our zombie wrangles his way out of a washing machine and tracks down where they package supplements. Sadly, the manager knocks him out. Meanwhile, Bora tells Sunji that the drug contains a strong hallucinogen. She immediately takes this to the cops. Superintendent Huang asks for proof, but Minho can't be reached, so she gets rejected blatantly. Do-hyun then hands her some pepper spray for self-defense and promises to get the search warrant. As for Minho, he wakes up in a strange room covered with tarp. He's then led by Mr. Kwang-shik to his chambers. He shows him footage of him being hit by a car and jumping out of a window, and he asks who he is. Minho only admits that he can't feel pain, and to test this out, Kwang-shik stabs him with a fork. He He's amazed by Minho and offers to give him Yoonju if he helps him. The zombie later tracks down his phone and gives Sunji instructions to escape with Yoonju by 8 p.m. next Tuesday. He returns to Kwang-shik, who continues to check his threshold for pain. As they become chummy, Sunji uses a drone to check out all the rooms in the fast center. She then texts Minho when she locates the target. Tuesday arrives and Kwang-shik hosts his program with Minho in the crowd. Sunji then sneaks in via a laundry basket and finds Yoonju tied up. She quickly unties her but falls on her face, trying to lift her. Back to Minho, he tries to escape while Kwang-shik is performing yet another miracle, but gets called to take the stage soon enough. Kwang-shik fakes a condition on him and twists his arm in front of everyone. Minho immediately screams, pretending to be in pain. He gets hit with a plank and falls immediately, spewing fake blood. In a panic, the manager comes to remove Kwang-shik from the stage, alerting him that the cops are around. Sunji stops them before they can leave, so the manager roughs her up. At that moment, Minho stops playing dead and runs away from a cheering crowd. He then attacks the manager with a bunch of business cards, giving Sunji a chance to pepper spray him. She goes after Kwang-shik next, but almost gets stabbed. Luckily, Minho shields her. The manager sprays everyone with a fire extinguisher, but amidst the fog, the zombie begins to strangle Kwang-shik. He pushes him to the ground and almost feeds on him, but Sunji, calling his name, stops him. The manager and Kwang-shik get arrested, and later on, Minho returns Yoonju to her mother. He wonders whether he has a family waiting for him when Sunji comes running to him. He offers to pay her a cut from his earnings and turns down her request to work together again. She heads home, where she and the family eat chicken and watch the news of Kwang-shik's arrest. At the station, Do-hyun and the others celebrate the arrest and pay no mind as Kwang-shik warns them that Minho isn't human. Meanwhile, Minho plays in his bathtub and has some raw chicken. He realizes that his window is open, so he quickly shuts it. Unfortunately, Sung-rak already saw him and is now petrified. To worsen things, Sunji barges in and sees the holes in his body. She freaks out immediately and runs as fast as she can. Upon getting home, she can't help but think about what she saw. She then refers to a video she made when he got hit with a helmet and notices the marks on his ankle. Taekyun sees them and immediately calls them zombie marks. They go on a spree, and the more he lists the attributes of a zombie, the more Sunji realizes that Minho has them all. She eventually screams after wondering why he didn't eat her all this time. The next day, Sung-rak tells Wei what he saw, and Wei claims that raw chicken is tasty in some cultures. This makes Sung-rak want to try it out for dinner. Anyway, Sun-young asks her little sister for rent again. In turn, Sunji claims that she's been dealing with a zombie situation. Taekyun doesn't help matters, as he pretends to be a zombie too. This just angers Sun-young some more, so she kicks her sister out, telling her not to return without any money. Sun-young later heads to the station and asks Do-hyun when he'll marry her sister. He clarifies that they're just friends, but Sun-young isn't buying it. On the flip side, Sunji gears up and approaches Minho. She's so scared that her hands begin to shake. She eventually asks for money, and Minho simply gives her a lot of it. She wishes him well, but as she's about to leave, she develops some stomach pain. She falls to the ground, and Minho removes the 3 layers covering her stomach. Sunji then passes out and wakes up in the hospital. Sun-young and her husband arrive soon enough, and the doctor announces that it was just Sunji's appendix that burst. Apparently, Minho carried her on his back and paid for her surgery. He even crosses paths with Do-hyun on his way out. As Do-hyun reaches Sunji's hospital room, her sister drags her husband out so the two can have some privacy. Meanwhile, Sung-rak and Wei get some raw chicken, and the vendor shows them a picture of Myuu as a member of the beard-loving gang. Minho hands Junwoo's dog back to him and sends him on his way. The boy then calls Sunji, and she asks about the zombie. Unfortunately, Junwoo doesn't know where he went. She stubbornly heads to his office and finds it empty. Apparently, Minho had already boarded a bus where a certain detective, Oh Jeum-tae, begins to search everyone's IDs for any suspicious activity. He reaches Minho, and the zombie hands over Myuung's ID. The detective isn't convinced, but before he can press him, Sunji arrives and defends Minho as her boss. Afterwards, they head to Bora's restaurant for some food, and she recognizes Minho as the dancer. Sunji continues to lie for him until Bora leaves them alone. She starts on the stew and then orders some raw meat for Minho. They spend the night talking. Sunji mostly drinks and asks Minho how it felt to wake up as a zombie. Minho then explains how trapped he felt, not being able to live or die. Sunji comes up with the bright idea that Minho can become a stellar detective and offers to help him find out who he is. She haggles her way until he makes her an intern for 2 months, after which she'll become a full employee. The next morning, she hands her sister an envelope of money for expenses and confesses that she got a job at the detective agency. Sun Young immediately takes Taekyun's rice and adds it to Sunji's plate. Afterwards, Sunji heads to work with a dozen frozen chickens and loads them into the freezer. Meanwhile, Sungruk is becoming more suspicious of Min-ho. He even paints a beard over his picture and compares it to that of Myuu Young. Sunji asks so many questions that the zombie is forced to send her out to share flyers. Later on, Sungruk tries to taunt him with a ball, so Min-ho kicks it into oblivion. He blocks his path in a bid to confirm who he is, but gets his hand slapped instead. At the police station, the manager makes mention of Myuu Young, and he gets connected to Sunji almost immediately. They then run a background check on him while he's busy getting fitted for a suit. Wei is wasting time when an angry Bora steps in with a ball, complaining that it broke her window. She goes on until Wei blames it on Myuu Young. Coincidentally, Sungruk arrives just then and takes all the blame. Bora instantly pokes a hole in the ball, and the wind blows her hair in a way that makes Wei fall in love with her. As she steps out, she runs into Min-ho in a suit so dazzling that it draws the attention of everyone. Up next, we see that Sunji has finished giving out flyers, so she indulges Junwoo and his friends by taking them to the arcade. There, they shoot zombies, but when it's her turn to play, she stops halfway. She gets a call from Do-hyun soon enough, telling her that he's at the Myuu Young agency. She rushes down there, but Min-ho gets there first. Do-hyun then introduces himself and asks if Min-ho is the real Kim Myuu Young. If Min-ho's heart could work, it would skip a beat. The detective then makes mention of fraud and fake IDs, and this eases Min-ho. He just claims that it comes with the job, so Do-hyun ends up thanking him for his help in the last case. Sunji rushes to join them and immediately acts as a buffer. The detective offers to take Min-ho to dinner, but Sunji creatively turns him down. She then escorts him to his car and bids him goodbye while Sungruk and Wei watch from above. Later on, she asks Bora about the causes of amnesia, and she lists traumatic events, among other things. Meanwhile, Min-ho watches a show where the main character has amnesia and doesn't remember that he's the heir to a big company. This makes him wonder if he's actually rich. He later gets on the roof with Junwoo and the other kids and watches as they play with the dog. He realizes that his appetite is now bigger, but Sunji thinks he's staring because he misses his family. She takes him downstairs in a feeble attempt to hypnotize him. 30 minutes later, nothing works, and Sunji is asleep, so Min-ho just leaves her there. That afternoon, Sungruk patronizes Sun Young's yogurt business and buys as many as $5 can carry. He takes them to the police station for some of the detectives and fraternizes with Lieutenant Hwang. Immediately, he hears a conversation about Myuu Young, so he slides over to eavesdrop, but nothing bad gets said about him. This makes Sungruk conclude that the detective must have paid off the officers. Anyway, Sunji goes through Min-ho's belongings he had on him when he woke up as a zombie. A watch, a lighter with a weird insignia on it. She snaps this one and asks online. And finally, the suit. Some time passes before someone pings her about recognizing the lighter. They set up a meeting and head to an open street the next day. Unfortunately, the person cancels on them via text, but Sunji bumps into Hyung Cheol as he returns from the hospital. She proceeds to introduce him to Min-ho and gives him a business card for their agency. He gets a call about his mother going missing and excuses himself to search for her. A very nosy Sunji then offers her and Min-ho's services, not knowing that they're being tailed by Sungruk and Wei. They start the search in the foothills of Mount Chaweol and work their way up. Sungruk also follows them. In the middle of their climb, Min-ho becomes hungry and catches a whiff of a rabbit. He treks on with full speed, leaving Sunji to eat his dust. This makes Sungruk totally give up tailing them, and he returns downhill. Soon enough, Min-ho sees the old lady's ID and follows the scent until he finds her. Sunji then arrives and points out a wild boar in the distance. As the beast charges towards her, she trips. Luckily, Min-ho is fast enough to save her. He then covers her and the old lady with an umbrella and leaves to fight the beast. It's wild boar versus Min-ho, and he takes the initial hit and a couple more hits before he lures the beast to the edge of a cliff. He manages to make it jump off but gets carried down with it. Sunji begins to search for him anxiously and eventually finds him. However, she ends up struggling to keep up as she carries the dead boar with Min-ho out of the area. They even make the news, and Sunji's entire family watches them. Everyone is so impressed with Min-ho that they interview him and take so many unwanted pictures. When he finally gets some breathing space, he joins Sunji. Hyung Cheol thanks him for finding his mom and leads her away. She stops halfway and runs back to Min-ho, calling him her son and crying that she misses him. The detective is very confused, but he stays calm until they leave. That night, Sunji finds her sister and Taekyun snuggling up, and she explains that she has been with her boss all day. They conclude that it's something romantic, but Sunji just excuses herself, too tired to fight. She ends up thinking about how Minho saved her from the boar, and it makes her smile. Meanwhile, Minho remembers the old lady from earlier and wonders if he has a mom who misses him too. Across the street, Sungrock is busy trying to defame Minho on the internet, despite all of Wei's opposition. Minho reads these comments the next day, and easily deduces that Sungrock is behind them. He's interrupted when Sunji shows up and takes him to a shaman. The detective doesn't believe in the shaman until she mentions him being between life and death. He's now willing to pay any amount to find answers, but Sunji reveals that the shaman is a con artist. She rattles the shaman's Buddhist jungles, and it triggers a memory for Minho. He clearly sees Sori waving at him with a bunny doll in her hand. He growls and then carries himself outside for some air. Sunji calls the station about the bunny, but they have no record of it in evidence. She suggests that they visit some places involved in the Santa case to see if they'll jog Minho's memory. They then pay Sori's home a visit. Unfortunately, her dad is out of the country for the month. Sunji becomes sober as they visit Sori's shrine next. She narrates how the little girl waited for her dad during Christmas, but got kidnapped before his arrival. She then takes a walk with her boss and goes on about investigating Sori's dad a month before the incident. Sunji feels her broadcast drew unnecessary attention to the girl and still blames herself for it. Later on, Detective Do-hyun comes across a picture of the bunny and texts it to Sunji. In turn, she pushes it to Minho, and he confirms that it's the one. Upon arrival at his office, Minho notices that someone has rampaged the whole place and taken the lighter. We then see Hyung Cheol with the same lighter as he burns Sori's bunny. Minho hears strange sounds coming from his bathroom and carefully makes his way there. He almost attacks the culprit but stops when he sees Sungrock and Wei. They step out and explain that they had come by earlier with sushi and soju and were just unlucky enough to be around when the intruder entered the office. They hid and watched him pry his way into Minho's safe. Minho asked for the identity of the intruder, but Sungrock just hands him a business card, asking him to come to his agency for the information. He and Wei then return to their office and await Minho in vain. Meanwhile, he wonders why someone would steal only a lighter. The next day is Junwoo's birthday, and his mom promises to make a marvelous dinner. Ban Sunji promises to buy him whatever he wants. She gets to work, and Minho tells her about the break-in and how only the lighter was stolen. They both have no idea that Sungrock bugged their office and is listening in on their conversation. On the other hand, Hyung Cheol cannot stop fiddling with the lighter. His wife then mentions that he has found it, and he lies that it was in his clothes the whole time. Later on, Minho and Sunji return to Sori's house, but they only see the maid. She tells them to try again in 2 days, seeing as her boss will be in Korea then. They head to the park where they discuss Sori's father and how he's a smuggler and money launderer. Suddenly, Minho feels a presence and attacks it. It turns out to be Taekyun, so the detective pops his shoulder back into place. Little Junwoo then invites Minho to his party and keeps insisting until he says yes. Sunji and he arrive at the party together, much to Sun Young's dismay. Do-hyun also drops by soon enough. Everyone hands the birthday boy his presents. Minho gets him free coupons to play with Hodu, and Junwoo loves it. As the party goes on, Minho grows hungrier. He almost eats some meat off of Taekyun's face. Luckily, Sunji rushes in and forces him to be in charge of the grill. He absent-mindedly watches as everyone sings and dances, so much so that he doesn't realize his hand is on fire. Everyone joins efforts to put it out, and that night, Sunji wraps his arm for show. Do-hyun later shows up with some fruits, and Minho discovers that Taekyun directed Fast Train to Busan, the same movie he watched when he became a zombie. Taekyun is so excited about this that they talk about zombies late into the night. Meanwhile, Hyung Cheol digs around the forest, looking for a body he cannot find. He then returns to Minho's office where they discuss said body. Minho can smell the lighter fluid as they talk, and Hyung Cheol ends up angrily grabbing him and whispering that they'll both be in trouble if he keeps chasing the So-ri case. He then pretends as though he has the wrong person and walks away. All this while, Sungrock and Wei have been listening in. Minho finds their bug and uses it to call them to his office. He then pays them to secretly follow Hyung Cheol. Minho tells Sunji everything the next day and warns her to be wary of Hyung Cheol. Right then, she gets a call from Do-hyun. Later, Sungrock and his assistant dress up as ice cream vendors, just to follow Hyung Cheol around. Sunji and her boss proceed to the police station, where Do-hyun shows them all of Sori's belongings after her death. Sunji then distracts the detective by dragging him out for coffee, while Minho literally sniffs the evidence. Afterwards, he shows up, and Sunji bids Do-hyun goodbye, leaving him to be chewed out by Officer Bae. Later that night, Sungrok takes more pictures of Hyung Cheol and brings the entire hall to Min-ho. He's satisfied with their services, so he gives them a couple of raw chickens. As he scrolls through the pictures, he remembers the house from one of them. Consequently, Sunji gains an audience with So-ri's father, and they share an emotional moment. Meanwhile, Min-ho tracks down the house from the picture. He smells the same resin from the evidence and concludes that Hyung Cheol murdered So-ri. The devil shows up, and Min-ho wastes no time accusing him. His mother then pops up and once again refers to Min-ho as her son. Hyung Cheol promptly sends her and his wife inside. As for Sunji, she notices Min-ho's watch in one of So-ri's pictures and shows a picture of him to her host. He immediately recognizes the zombie as their private bodyguard, Kang Min-ho. She happily returns to the office, hoping to break the good news to her boss. On the other hand, Hyung Cheol finally reveals that he and Min-ho planned everything for Christmas. He blames him for killing So-ri and dumping her body in the reservoir. Min-ho's memories then begin to confirm what his accomplice is saying. He screams underneath the rain as he realizes that he is the worst human ever. Hyung Cheol advises him not to do anything stupid and leaves Min-ho to his conscience. He's so downcast that he walks back to his office without caring that he looks like a zombie. He doesn't even pick up Sunji's calls and just watches from a distance as Sunji comes downstairs. Detective Do-hyun picks her up and they go out for dinner. Bora stops by their table and talks about Min-ho as usual. While they have a nice time, the zombie thinks he deserves to die, so he fires up a drill and aims for his skull. The drill stops just before it can pierce him, and Min-ho touches the exposed wire that caused this. Unfortunately, it shocks him into passing out. The next morning, Sunji comes into work and still doesn't find her boss. She only sees a picture of Hyung Cheol on the floor, and it's enough to draw a link to Sungrok. She barges into their office and threatens to smash Wei's head with her shot-putting skills. He then spills that Hyung Cheol stole the lighter. Sunji then calls Bora for some medical records. As for Min-ho, he tries to slip into a restricted area of the mountain but gets stopped by Tae-kyun. He's shocked to see Min-ho like that, but believes it when he lies about putting on makeup. He admits that he's searching for a zombie and advises the detective to take care. They part ways, only for Sunji to threaten to track down Hyung Cheol. Min-ho tries calling her, but she doesn't answer. As luck would have it, some random hiker forgets her BB cream and Min-ho finds it. Kim Kyung-mi approaches her husband about Min-ho, but he quickly assures her that he's dead. At that moment, Sunji comes knocking and claims that there's a new development in the Santa case. They sit to talk, and she lies about footage from a dashcam. She also asks about Hyung Cheol's arm just so that she can tell him that he only got stabbed. He realizes that she knows too much, so he chases her. She hides in the next room but gets knocked out by Kyung-mi. Sunji wakes up with a gag and overhears Hyung Cheol confessing that it was his wife he saw by the reservoir. Apparently, she was the one who also stabbed him. A tied-up Sunji watches as the family shares a meal. She then grabs a lobster claw thrown her way by the old lady and uses it to etch away at her restraints. Meanwhile, Min-ho runs into town like he's on fire. After their meal, Kyung-mi approaches Sunji with a butcher's knife, but she's lucky enough to free herself in time to dodge. She knocks Kyung-mi down, and they continue to struggle with each other until Sunji sprays the woman's eyes with some air freshener and makes a run for it. Min-ho quickly sneaks her into a compound nearby, and they watch as Kyung-mi runs past. Sunji then reveals to her boss that he was just a bodyguard and had nothing to do with the murder. Soon enough, Hyung Cheol tries to flee with his family, but his wife returns to fetch some gold and cash. Unfortunately, the cops show up and nab her, so her husband escapes alone. Sunji wakes up in her room with Do-hyun sitting beside her, and he reassures her that everything is taken care of. He then heads outside to threaten Min-ho never to put his friend in danger again. As expected, Sunji doesn't stay put, so her sister and Tae-kyun do everything possible to stop her from leaving. At the police station, Do-hyun tries to drill Kyung-mi for information, and her silence angers the lieutenant. Min-ho is having a hard time piecing things together. He gets a call from Hyung Cheol and immediately asks him for the whole truth. Unfortunately, all he gets is a threat to someone's life. Just then, Detective Bae announces in the precinct that Hyung Cheol's car was found heading to Chawale Mountain. The detectives head out immediately and cross paths with Sungrok and Wei. Upon entering the station, they meet the lieutenant trying to question Kyung-mi. Luckily, Sungrok knows a bunch of stuff about her. He then reveals the fact that she can't have kids, and apparently she kidnapped So-ri to start a family. Meanwhile, Min-ho has already tracked down his nemesis and gets blown up for it. After the explosion, his memories come flooding back. He had taken So-ri out for Christmas and saw Hyung Cheol lurking nearby. She was taken from the house, and Minho found the culprit's lighter outside. He used it to trace him, only to find So-ri tied up. He tried to release the crying girl but got knocked out and later shot point blank by Hyung Cheol. Back to the present, Minho is so angry that he steps into the shed nearby and punches the heck out of Hyung Cheol as his mother watches. He pummels this hoodlum's mouth with punches up until he gets shot. Hyung Cheol then tries escaping with his mom, only for Minho to rise again. He shoots him again and again, but Minho keeps coming. Hyung Cheol then aims for his head, but his mom takes the bullet. This makes Minho remember her, the time she scolded him for always fighting, and he jerked around about making her sit on a pile of money when he made it. He watches her die and cries out in pain. It turns out that Hyung Cheol's family died in a fire when he was 7, and he was the lone survivor. This doesn't matter to an angry Minho, and he loses himself in rage. After the whole debacle, a funeral is held for Minho's mother, so Sunji and her family show up to pay their last respects. Afterwards, Sunji explains to Minho that he always dressed as Santa every year, but couldn't do it the previous year because his mom was sick. She then leaves to hang out with Taekyun and overhears the news that Hyung Cheol was mutilated to death. She then hurries back to Minho. They step outside for a conversation, and he tells her that she can stop coming to work since he has already found his past. Sunji brings up the mutilation of Hyung Cheol, and her boss leaves it hanging, saying that he ate him. Afterwards, Minho erases all traces of him being at Moo-young's agency, down to his BB cream and raw chicken. As for Sunji, she stands on her balcony, unable to accept that her boss ate a person. She then gets a call from Do-hyun, explaining that Hyung Cheol's organs ruptured from the force of a bullet. She rushes back to the office, only to find it empty. At that same moment, Minho visits his childhood home, reminiscing about time with his mom. Sadly, he has to leave because of the new owner. That night, he sits on a park bench, downtrodden to have found his past, but still alone. Sunji refuses to get out of bed, so her sister helps her, raging on about how Minho doesn't have the right to fire her with only a day's notice. Sunji isn't feeling up to this, so she pushes her sister out of her room. Right outside, Sun-young continues complaining to her husband and piques his interest when she mentions Minho's investments. Minho walks by some chickens in the market and thinks about Sunji. He shakes it off, reminding himself that he's still a zombie. For some reason, Sung-rak and Wei celebrate their opponent's disappearance. Meanwhile, the said opponent begins to get hungry, so hungry that he picks up ants from the floor. That night, he loses himself and passes out. By the time he wakes up, he realizes that he's back in Moo-young's office and has eaten all of the chicken he threw out. Soon enough, Taekyun comes knocking, so Minho quickly applies BB cream. He ends up asking for investment in his zombie movie. Anyway, Minho thinks it's a crap story, so Taekyun grabs his scripts and promises to return with something better. Weirdly, Junwoo shows up not long after, asking Minho to help him with Hodu. The zombie almost eats him, but he does everything in his power to restrain himself. He quickly sends the boy away and he tries to escape later on. Unfortunately, Bora shows up with fresh tripe. He finds her more appetizing than the meal and tries to warn her to leave if she wants to live. She finds this attractive instead of dangerous, so Minho locks the door behind him. Across the street, Wei stares down with jealousy. He later joins Sung-rak to share flyers and witnesses as he tries to hire Sunji. At that moment, Bora comes downstairs and informs her that she just saw her boss. She immediately runs upstairs and catches Minho as he's about to leave. He tries telling her off, but she doesn't listen. To worsen things, her big sister shows up and starts a ruckus, threatening to sue him. Sunji then lies. He didn't fire her, but just went on a trip. Minho follows up by handing Sun-young a 20% discount. They step back inside, and Minho admits that he wants to live like a human. He then asks that Sunji help him. She goes home to ask Taekyun about how to train a zombie, but even he thinks it's impossible. The next day, she appears holding Hodu and introduces Seol Chae-hyun, an animal specialist, to her boss. He mentions how aggression may be tied to something else and recommends walking the dog to build a bond. Sunji then takes Minho for a walk, despite him clarifying that he's not an animal. Per the specialist's suggestion, they try to build patience by delaying when Minho gets to feed on some chicken. Sunji keeps teasing him, and it gets tiring for the zombie. At the station, Do-hyun looks into the woman called Kim Kyung-ja and searches for her son, Minho, on their database. He's surprised by how much he looks like Moo-young, and the lieutenant confirms that it's him. Up next, Sunji sets up multiple cameras and cuffs Minho to see what happens when he blacks out. As they start the timer, Sung-rak spies on them from across the street. Come daybreak, Do-hyun drops by to see Minho. Luckily, Sunji is around to stop him. She then lies and says that her boss traveled to the United States. It's now 36 hours into the experiment, and Minho gets really uneasy. By 37 hours, he had broken free and begun ravaging the chickens in the fridge. Sunji tries to sneak away, but the zombie catches her in the hallway. He almost bites her, but she slams his head with a frying pan. He wakes up the next morning wondering what happened. Sunji then explains how she knocked him out and adds that she thinks remaining a private detective is the best way to feel human. Meanwhile, Kwang Shuk begins his 5-year sentence and yells that Myuu is the real con artist. His cellmate overhears this, and he gets set free later that day, and he turns out to be the man who killed the real Kim Myuu. Minho and Sunji review the tape of Minho's transformation, and he's the only one scared to watch. He gets so scared that he dumps Sunji's popcorn. They later review different weapons that she can use to knock him out if need be, and he picks up a small shot. Myuu's killer then calls the office just to confirm that he's alive. They temporarily shut down their practice to handle Minho's zombie infestation. After this, he suggests that they find the man who killed the real Myuu. Too bad that the only clue he has is a hairdresser's receipt. Meanwhile, the killer steps into Sungrock's office while he's eating, and the detective stops everything to pay homage. He looks across the street as he asks about Minho. Sungrock just refers to him as a novice detective, but the killer still asks him to tail Minho. Later on, the zombie and his assistant visit the salon on the receipt and get tailed by Sungrock and Wei beneath cardboard boxes. Unfortunately for them, Junwoo and his friends see the boxes moving, so they attack them. They speak with the hairdresser, and she makes mention of Myuu, asking about a veterinarian named Dr. No. He was also accused of disposing of medical waste without safety measures and had to spend some time in prison. It turns out he hasn't been the same since his daughter went missing 5 years ago. With this information, they bid the hairdresser goodbye. Sungrock comes in after them, wanting to know what the hairdresser said. He easily gets sidetracked into getting a perm, though. Sunji and her boss head to the veterinarian's office, and he recognizes the poster on the wall, confirming that Dr. No is in fact Myuu's killer. Sungrock sneakily takes a picture of them and later shows it to Dr. No. This makes him wonder if he saw him kill a man. The doctor then asks Sungrock to set up a meeting with Myuu and pays him a boatload of money. Minho and Sunji stop by her friend's restaurant, where they hear some news about their new target. Bora shows up and adds that the doctor does all sorts of dreadful things in the name of animal protection. Anyway, things get heated, so Minho excuses himself before he eats anyone. Unfortunately, he runs into Do-hyun just around the corner and gets asked about Kang Min-ho. The detective showed him a picture and could swear that they must be twins. Minho just plays it easy and slithers out of the situation. Do-hyun heads to the restaurant and asks if Sunji is working on a case. Of course, she lies that she isn't and changes the topic. Meanwhile, Tae-kyun is sitting in the park and lamenting about losing another investor when he sees Minho. He blocks his path and begins to pitch him his script. Minho listens to the whole story just to tell Tae-kyun that he's not interested. That night, Sungrock rigs Minho's door with electricity in a bid to quietly get him for Dr. No. They head back and wait until the target arrives. Minho gets electrocuted and the whole city blacks out. Sungrock then checks it out and is surprised to see him in his chair. He steps back and gets electrocuted too, returning electricity to the city. Wei checks on him, and he also gets electrocuted. The next day, Sunji meets them sleeping it off, and her boss wakes them up for questioning. They lie and say that they came over for some drinks, so Minho just lets them go. He later smells something on Sungrock's stabilizer, the smell of Dr. No. Minho wonders if Myuu was trying to warn him, so he concludes that they have to find the case he was working on before his death. They begin to look for clues, and as they search the secret room, Sunji gets a call from a lady at an animal protection group. She meets with her and discovers that Dr. No is a ruthless hunter who was sent to jail for poaching. Back at the office, Minho gets ambushed by some hoodlums. He easily takes them out with a towel in his fists, so Sungrock heads over there to finish things himself. They exchange blows, but all Minho can see is dinner. He restrains Sungrock and the detective manages to break free, stabbing Minho with a stake that he easily removes from his chest. Sungrock becomes scared as the zombie approaches him. Luckily, he just knocks him out and runs away. While Wei checks on his boss, Sunji runs after hers, throwing shot put after shot put in a bid to hit his head. She finally gets him down using a frying pan. The next day, Sungrock and Wei return Dr. No's money alongside a spade stained with Minho's blood. They then tell him that the detective isn't human anymore. Meanwhile, Minho wakes up and remembers how fleshy Sungrock looked the night before. On this note, he decides not to question him until his appetite is under control. Sunji then updates him on Dr. No and how the number of animals he caught isn't equal to the ones found. As they continue cleaning up, some documents fall out of a chair, and they realize that they're evidence of Dr. No carrying out some type of experiment. On the other hand, the said doctor tests Minho's blood from the spade, He later injects a dead rabbit with a serum that brings it back to life. After confirming that Dr. No performed zombie experiments, Minho concludes that he must be able to return him to his human form. They discuss the experiment further and discover that Moo Young kept tabs on the doctor. He even followed him to the dump site and took pictures. At that point in time, no one knew Minho was buried nearby. The test drug seeped into the soil and into Minho, thus turning him into a zombie. The duo discuss a missing persons case from 5 years ago and conclude that Sung Rok must know something. The detective is now delirious and tries to tell Wei that Minho isn't human. To worsen things, Minho comes knocking. Sung Rok remains scared until Sunji appears and asks about the missing persons case. Sung Rok calls it the shadow case, explaining that people of all ages went missing, with Dr. No's daughter being the first case. He then quickly denies knowing the doctor and gets warned to be careful. After Minho leaves, Sung Rok pays Dr. No a visit and tells him everything. The doctor excuses himself to attend to a customer, and while he's away, Sung Rok discovers a hidden door. He and Wei check it out and get the hell scared out of them when they find another zombie in a cage. Days go by and Dr. No doesn't open his shop. This worries Sunji, but her stomach growling worries Minho more. She offers to go get breakfast along with some chicken for him. Before she leaves, she puts a location app for couples on his phone. As planned, she gets the chicken, but it is delayed by her sister on her way back. Meanwhile, Dr. No shows up at Minho's office in a hazmat suit and knocks him out with green gas. He then takes him to his lab where Sung Rok and Wei are already tied up. Detectives Do Hyun and Bai visit the funeral home of Minho's mother, and the attendant confirms that he stayed for 3 days. They find this really suspicious. Back to Sunji, she returns to the office and is confused when she doesn't see her boss. This makes her check the location app and realize that he's at Dr. No's clinic. The doctor is busy collecting a blood sample from Minho, who wakes up just then and yells at him for his bizarre experiments. Meanwhile, Sunji makes her way to the clinic and remembers her boss warning her not to interfere if he goes missing. She then reaches out to her former producer, and they discuss the shadow case. He shows her pictures of the victims and the locations where they were nabbed. Sunji realizes that they are all around the vet clinic, so she takes pictures and heads out. Minho manages to break out of his restraints and is distracted as he's about to free Sung Rok. He approaches the nearby cage and discovers that there's another zombie besides him. At this point, Dr. No knocks all 3 of them out. As for Sunji, she heads home and changes into all black. She packs a frying pan, some chicken, and a taser. Minho gets tied tighter than before and watches as the doctor caresses his wife, or what's left of her. He narrates how she was dying and he administered his drug to her, turning her into this unknown beast. Minho is perplexed by how easily the doctor can perpetuate evil, but it doesn't faze Dr. No at all. Sunji sits in front of the vet clinic, wondering what could be happening inside. Well, inside, Minho explains how terrible it is to want to eat humans, but the doctor only cares about his wife being alive. Sun Young visits the police station and tells Do Hyun that her sister is going out with Minho. The detective panics, but not for long, seeing as a call comes through about a corpse in Choeil Mountain. They check it out, only to discover that it's the real Kim Moo Young. Sunji decides to break into the clinic anyway, so she draws the doctor to the surface using alarms. While he's searching the perimeter, she makes her way to the basement and frees Sung Rok. He tries warning her that her boss is a zombie and is surprised that she already knew. She then heads over to Minho and begins to cut him loose. Sung Rok soon realizes that his precious dog was also used for experimentation. This infuriates him, and he slams the doctor's head with a plaque. This gets him strangled until Wei bashes Dr. No's head again. The doctor then takes the plaque and stomps Sung Rok's head until he passes out. Downstairs, Sunji is still trying to cut Minho loose when Dr. No's wife wakes up. She approaches Sunji, but Minho frees himself in time to save her. They then stumble upon mementos from every missing person, and it becomes clear that the doctor experimented on people and had his wife eat them afterwards. Dr. No appears soon enough, leading Sung Rok and Wei down at gunpoint. At the same time, Do Hyun visits Bora's restaurant, and she tells him about Sunji snooping around the vet clinic. For obvious reasons, only Minho gets held at gunpoint. Dr. No just sends his wife after the other 3. Sung Rok attempts to retrieve a frying pan to hit her with, but he fails woefully. She attacks Sung Rok viciously while Minho struggles with Dr. No. The gun then goes off and bores a hole in his wife's head. Right outside, Do Hyun overhears the ruckus and makes his way in. He meets Dr. No crying over his wife's death and Minho being sober about killing his kind. The cops flood the area soon enough, and medics transport Sung Rok for treatment. Do Hyun then peels Sunji away from her boss, and he just disappears afterwards. Just then, the detective gets confirmation of Kim Moo Young's identity, but Minho is long gone. Do-hyun tracks down Min-ho and charges him with the murder and abandonment of Kim Moo-young. On the other hand, Officer Bae-ee and everyone who was being transported alongside the doctor get into a ghastly accident. Dr. No crawls out of the wreckage and smiles, having become a zombie himself. Do-hyun rushes to the hospital to check on his partner, but Lieutenant Hwang informs him that she's still unconscious. Before he returns, Min-ho has already escaped his cuffs. At that moment, Sun-ji checks on Sung-rak, and it turns out that his belly is too fat for the zombie's teeth to penetrate. She later breaks the news to her boss, and he warns her to lie and say that he forced her to do everything. He's miserable again and wishes he had died instead of his mom. Sun-ji tries to reach him again and again, but to no avail. The next day, Wei sees on the news that Dr. No escaped. He and Sung-rak immediately panic and lock everything down. Later on, Tae-kyun and Sun-ji overhear the news of a body being found without a head and organs. Tae-kyun is excited about the zombie scenario, but his sister-in-law is quite downcast. At the station, Sung-rak and Wei try telling the cops that they witnessed a real zombie, but nobody believes them. They then head back to their office carefully, only to find that it has been broken into. Across the street, Sun-ji meets Do-hyun in her office. He sits her down and questions her about Min-ho's past, on which she stays mute until he mentions Dr. No. She then tells him about the zombie debacle, but Do-hyun still doesn't believe her. He promises to bring her up on charges if she's withholding information. After he leaves, she tries to decipher what Sung-rak has been signaling via the window. She just goes over to their office and is surprised to see her boss. He explains that he had to cut all contact, and they proceed to discuss Dr. No. Min-ho is certain that he injected himself with the fluid extracted from his body. They then mention the green gas that knocked all of them out, and Sun-ji just pulls out a vial of it from her pocket. She goes on to ask her sister for whatever she can find out on Dr. No, so Sun-young uses her yogurt stand to hustle some gossip. Apparently, all the stuffed animals in his lab were real. Soon enough, they order some food from Bora just to get her to come over. She comes through with some quality food, and they all discuss it as they eat. They mention the stuffed animal hobby to her, and she jokes about Dr. No stuffing his wife. An idea is born, and they decide to reach Dr. No's wife first and lure him in with her body. The only problem is how to infiltrate the morgue. That night, they wrap up Min-ho as the body they're coming to deliver, and the doctor lets them through after seeing the bullet hole in his stomach. Wang then holds a frozen picture over the security camera while the others look for the body. Min-ho pulls it out. Sun-ji distracts an incoming guard, and Sung-rak and Wei roll the body out. Min-ho sends them ahead after catching a whiff of the doctor and promises to meet up later. As expected, Dr. No shows up, but he's too slow to land a hit on Min-ho, so he easily gets knocked down. Sun-ji gets too impatient in the car, so she grabs a frying pan and heads back in. Unfortunately, Min-ho wastes too much time contemplating whether or not to kill Dr. No, and ends up being strangled. The doctor knocks him out and swipes Sun-ji for the road. He later calls him with a location, only for Do-hyun to hold him and the others at gunpoint. There's no time, so Min-ho knocks the detective out, puts him in the car, and drives off to meet Dr. No. On the other hand, Tae-kyun is at the precinct, going on and on about zombies. At the drop-off site, Dr. No knocks Min-ho around like a soccer ball and drags a tied-up Sun-ji to the car. There, Do-hyun tries to stop him and even shoots him. The doctor easily knocks Do-hyun down and takes his gun. In turn, Min-ho wrestles with him and gets shot twice. The detective unties Sun-ji and now believes everything she said before. Min-ho trades punches with the doctor until he retrieves the gun. He's still confident, thinking that Min-ho won't shoot him, and he's right. Sung-rak and Wei enter at that moment and throw masks at everyone. They then attack Dr. No with the green gas from his lab. Apparently, they had planned it all out and used the tracking device to locate Min-ho. Bora had analyzed the gas and made it in bulk, so Sung-rak and Wei spray it excessively until the doctor passes out. They barely have time to celebrate when Dr. No awakens and takes Sung-rak hostage, leaving Min-ho no choice but to shoot him in the head. Everyone tries to reassure him that he'll be fine, but Min-ho still wants to sequester himself in the mountains. Sun-ji bursts into tears and hugs him. Wei joins in, and so does Sung-rak. 1 year passes, and Tae-kyun is finally rich enough to take his wife to get her hair done. He even wins the Best Director award for his movie Zombie Detective, for which he delivers a beautiful speech. Officer Bae is finally doing better, so Do-hyun visits her. The other officers see them together and conclude that they finally decided to go out. As for Wei, he quits being a detective's assistant for Bora, and they finally fall in love. Then there's Sun-ji, who takes over the Kim Moo-young agency and promises to do good work just like Min-ho would. She later gets invited to a Halloween party and arrives in a bride's outfit. She hangs around her friends until she sees Min-ho dressed as himself, a dashing zombie. Sunji walks up to him and they spend the next couple of minutes catching up. He then pulls out the picture of an American and claims that he has been working on a cure for zombies. He asks Sunji for her help and she doesn't hesitate to give it. At that moment, a lady is murdered on the dance floor, so Minho steps in, takes a whiff, and easily discovers that a human has yet again killed his kind.